Steve Sherlock here for Franklin Matters, Franklin Public Radio. Available anywhere, anytime on the internet via your browser at WFPR.FM and in the local Franklin, Mass. FM radio dial. Yeah, that thing with the dials or the buttons, 102.9. Here today via Zoom with a town council candidate for a biennial election in 2025, Max Morrongiello. Max, thank you for doing this.
Thank you for doing this. This is great. I think we need to more civil discourse, and I think this is a great way to get the word out about all the different candidates. So thank you so much for doing this.
I think it needs to be done, and Franklin matters, as you've heard me say many times. So, yeah, it needs to be done. So let's jump right in because civil discourse happens to be one of the questions we're going to talk about anyway. So, so for those who may not know Max, and on one hand, it's like, well, somebody doesn't know Max, but yeah, I mean, we're a dynamic environment. People are moving in, leaving, whatever. So tell a little bit, or as much as you want, of your Franklin story, how much time you've lived here, or your road to Franklin, and kind of like how your involvement in the community here, so people have a little bit more understanding of who's this Max guy that Steve's talking to.
Absolutely. So I've been here most of my life, the last 25 years. My parents, we moved here because we heard they had a good school system. And being on the autistic spectrum, I had some special needs, and we needed those to be accommodated. And so I was fortunate to be able to attend the school system here. I went to the Bi-County Collaborative for a good chunk of time, and then I also mainstreamed in a few classes at Franklin High. Actually, one of the real big things that really started getting me involved in politics was I was mainstreaming in my statistics class, and it was 2008, and there was a Proposition 2.5 override that was going to be on the ballot. And at that override, there were over 40 teachers whose positions were at stake, including my stats teacher. And I decided to get involved. There was a previous group on Facebook that overrided the previous campaign from 2007. And I took it over. I ran with it. I organized on Facebook. So I was actually featured in the Milford Daily News at the time for my organizing work on that. Unfortunately, it didn't pass, and my stats teacher and many others lost their job. So I really, I've stayed involved since then. I went to college a little bit. I didn't finish, but I was very involved in student government, and then I sort of worked on myself. I had a lot of anxiety, but I was able to work on myself and focusing on being an advocate for people who were with mental health issues. So one of the things I did was I served on a human rights committee to make sure people's rights were protected. Um, you have a right to, if you're in a assisted living program, you have a right to get mail, you have a right to a telephone, you have a right to have confidential communications. And I made sure those rights were protected for people. And I also served on a RFR committee for a mental health provider in the region as well.
And what is
Um,
RFR, if I may?
so it stands for request. It's related to RFP, which is request for proposal.
Okay,
I can't remember what the R stands for in that other version of it.
that's okay.
But it's
It's
when I put out a
close.
contract for someone to bid on, like an organization, or that they have to get competing bids, and they have to decide which bid is the best. So I helped decide, as someone who was a peer, what was in the best interest of the mental health community, and we really worked hard to make sure that it met the needs of the community. But then I sort of worked on myself. I went back to school, went to Mass Bay Community College part time, joined student government there. We did a lot of advocacy. We got part time students recognized on the dean's list, where actually most of the students are part time, but they weren't being recognized. So we said, hey, this isn't right. So as student government, we petitioned to change that, and we got it through. And then I also graduated from Mass Bay. I got a 4.0 and gave the commencement speech there. That's something I'm very proud about. And then I went to Bridgewater State and did well there, got a 4.0 there. I got a degree in political science with a concentration in public administration. And throughout so then I come back here, and throughout the time I'm focused on, I've been a longtime member of the local party committee. I'm one of the vice chair for one of the committees in Franklin who do party organizing. And then just been active in town in terms of advocating for people. I've been we'll talk about it a little bit later maybe, but I've done a lot of advocacy for low income seniors. I was able to get a tax relief for them through the council. I'm not even on the council. I was able to push for that and advocate for that, as well as a discount on people's trash, water, and sewer bills to 50%, so that they don't have to, they can make ends meet. And I think people are really struggling right now
Hmm.
rising costs, inflation, rising
Yeah,
taxes, and I think being able to have that relief is something I'm really fighting for.
good. Thank you. That helps. Discourse, I think you're aware, is certainly a key component of our democratic republic form of government. And the political party divide, unfortunately, is now is creating the divide worse than ever. As an individual, how would you address that, and what can you and would do to help, bridge the divide here in Franklin, at least?
I think the most important thing is to listen to people who disagree with you. I've been, at the Harvest Festival, Strawberry Stroll. I've talked to people who they might have disagreements, but I want to listen. I want to understand where people are coming from. I think that we with free speech is something that's very important. I'm never going to silence anyone for speaking their views as long as they're not harming anyone. Speak your mind. It's important as a democracy, and also just about by being myself. Some people might not. Um, Someone who's gay, disabled, Jewish, people might not have exposure to that. And just by being myself and being open to people about who I am as a person, you open eyes. I think one of the things I've done with mental health is trying to combat the stigma of mental health. And and people, they don't fully understand it, but when they understand, oh, this is a person, he's living a life like this, a normal life, he's able to contribute to society. I think that's a way to educate people and bring people in. Um, and so I think just try not to be outside my bubble, as well as also organizing people to take action on the things that they care about. After this campaign, I'm not gonna drop the campaign. I'm going to actually bring people in and say, okay, what can we do together to make positive change? I think a good model of this was when Barack Obama was president. He had Organizing for America, and after the campaign, he didn't just stop what he was doing. He actually tried to bring people in, and this is true. I don't care if you agree with me or disagree with me. I want people to have their voice heard. So I think being able to empower people is important. And I think a lot of people feel upset because they don't feel empowered. They feel helpless, especially when they feel like there's a government that doesn't listen to them. And so I want to make people feel, okay, well, what are the processes? How do you make change? What's the right way to go about doing it? And I think that that's one way to do that.
Hmm. Sure. That sounds good. And what experience or background have you that would you believe would help you serve in this particular role as town council? Or another way to phrase it, what do you bring to the table for the council that perhaps somebody else doesn't and would thereby benefit the council?
So, like I said, I do have a degree in public administration. I've taken classes in public finance, policy analysis, strategic planning. I have a lot of that information on how to effectively govern at my fingertips. I'm also very good with data and doing research. So, if there's something I don't fully understand, being able to look at what that data is and being able to better understand it. Sometimes things come to a conclusion that neither people on one side or the other was going to expect. A lot of times it's more nuanced.
Hmm.
So I think being able to have that data background is important. Um, I think that there's a lot of things that we have some people running were single issue candidates who talk about waste or one thing or the other, but they haven't actually really done anything about it. So we have people who I've been the only person in a decade who's gone to a finance committee and saying, "Hey, is that number looks a little high?" No one else has done it. And so I think it's enough. It's one thing to talk the talk, but you've got at the end of the day, you got to walk the walk. And I think with a lot of the issues being brought up right now, you really need to be able to govern on everything. You got to look at the schools, the police, the fire. You got to look at trade offs between funding different departments. You got to look at the culture of the institution. You can't just run on a single issue and you know um, expect to be able to govern effectively.
Yeah, I think that sets us up to the next question, which gets into a little bit more detail. So, Chloe, one of the key responsibilities of the council is to hire and provide oversight for the town administrator and his or her team. For example, while you can serve as an escalation point for the community, if something is happening, that does not include micromanaging a particular department or operation. Do you agree or disagree? And explain either way.
Yeah, so I think if someone has a pothole that needs to be fixed, obviously it's not something that I would address as a town councilor directly. I might refer them, kick them to the right DPW, or say this is the proper channel to deal with this, and refer them to that. I think when an issue becomes systemic, sometimes we used to talk about, some towns might have a toxic culture, or there might be repeated instances of certain problems that seem to be reoccurring. That's when it becomes a policy issue, and I think that that's something that the town council actually does have purview over. In terms of it is tricky. I think right now the charter doesn't really differentiate like what policies go before the council and what do not. And I think maybe a bylaw or something that would be delineate, because like the library has their own board of directors that deals with policy, so we don't need to deal with that. So like department, so being able to figure out what policies rise to the level of town council involvement, I think is important to delineate, and I don't think that's really been done currently. I
Yeah,
was
in my
uh,
view, at least, there are certainly is a variance within the council, never mind a greater variance within the community. So, at a minimum, communication around those that exist and identification of those that don't, that perhaps should. So, yeah, I concur on that part. Second question really is kind of three bundled into one. So, I'll try to go slowly, and then if you need to have it rephrased, don't hesitate to ask. The town council approves the annual budget, which sets the priorities for how Franklin operates. Faced with the fiscal challenges over the next several years, what are your financial priorities, or what are the financial priorities that you think we need to address? And then the second and the third part, how do you explain what needs to be done to the voters and residents? Because I think we've talked um, so far that that's needed as well. And what would you do to help the community understand the separation of roles between the council and the school committee?
Yeah, so I think first off, when it comes to the budget, I've taken a little bit of economics, a little bit of public administration, and it's very different than accounting. With accounting, you look at every dollar and see, okay, was it spent the way it should? But with economics and public policy, you say, okay, if you spend this dollar here, that means you can't spend it in this other place. So you look at opportunity cost and it says, okay, if I can't spend it on education, or if I spend a dollar on police, I can't spend it on education. And what's the most utility you could get for that single dollar, that marginal utility? And so as a politician, not a public administrator, their job is to sort of say, okay, this if you do this, this will happen. They're not supposed to make a judgment call. If you do this, this will happen. And it's the politician's job to say, okay, this is what we should do. And so, as a politician, that you make those judgment calls as to, is it better to fund the schools? Is it better to fund the police with the limited resources we have, assuming you don't grow the pie? So I think that in terms of my budget priorities, I don't, I, I don't, if you don't grow the pie, which if you don't have an override and we keep having inflation, which is one of the big drivers of our budget, I wouldn't want to see the library cut. I think that we would lose our accreditation, which would be terrible for the library. I'm also concerned about sort of the revenue we get back from the fire department and the public safety from that. I also support parity between not the police, the schools, and the municipal side of the budget. So making sure they rise evenly. We can make some adjustments for enrollment, but ultimately we should take politics out of, tit for tat out of the school versus the municipal side. Which, to your point, I think is not necessarily a misunderstanding of what the role of the school committee is. I think it's more of the animosity between the schools and the rest of the town, and how some of those things have been handled. And I really want to build bridges. I want to meet with leaders of the school committee. Uh, you know, um, I don't want to tread on their turf, but just listening to what's going on at that level, talking to the superintendent, understanding, and talking to the public. And I think the joint budget subcommittee is a very good way to deal with that. In terms of if we had to cut somewhere where we would cut, I think looking at the 2013 fiscal budget, we had lower staff in certain departments, and I think being able to use that as a guide to okay, we had this in the past. That's where I would look first to. And of course, I don't enjoy making cuts. I don't want to make cuts. But if it's unfortunately budgeting is a zero sum game, and I think that if I had to make the cuts, I would look at those previous levels and see make cuts accordingly.
Okay, thank you. The master plan was developed over a period of a number of months, I think 18 months. Do you support the goals and recommendations of the 2025 master plan? And if so, what would you do as a town councilor to help implement them? Or if not, why not?
So I absolutely support the master plan. A lot of volunteer work went into that with hours and hours and hours. And we had, it was like, how many years, Chief? How many years did they meet? It was two,
18 months, really.
18 months. So I think, to throw that out would be a waste. We had a lot of participation from the citizen and the public and surveys that were done. I think in terms of how I would approach it, I think the goal setting process, and I think one of the first things I'd do as a councilor would be to say that I have a single goal that says we would complete 15% of the master plan remaining that still has to be completed every 2 years. So, we sort of front load it a little bit because you get the easier stuff first, and then every 2 years we would do a little bit. We would have the remaining 15%, and I don't think it's reasonable to complete the whole thing. I think we got to aim for it, but I think there's some stuff with funding that it's going to be difficult, and I think, but I do support getting a majority of the master plan completed, and maybe even more than that if we are able. A lot of good ideas went into that, and I think it's going to make the town a lot better.
Good. And one other question that I haven't formally added to the list that I've provided to the candidates, and for the listeners, yes, the candidates did get the questions beforehand. There's nothing trick about this. We want an intelligent response so that we all, as voters and residents, can make informed decisions when we vote for the November election. So the question being, we've covered a bunch of topics that effectively are in your area. Is there something else that we haven't discussed that you'd like to add to make sure the voters and residents hear your position on that?
Yeah, so I think as I said before, I've been looking out for the little guy in terms of making sure they have relief when they need it. I'm going to continue to do that. I think I have a priority to look at the stormwater tax and provide an exemption for low income people for that and seniors for that, and that's something that Franklin doesn't do currently. I'm going to continue to sort of, advocate for police, fire, schools, or basically smart infrastructure, making sure we have the capacity to do that, to fund those services, as well as good governance and transparency and building a sense of community. Because I think if we don't put that effort in, things aren't going to get better for us as a town. I in terms of my campaign, my slogan is integrity, action, and results. So I don't have any conflicts of interest. I don't have any. I'm not a developer. I'm not a realtor. I you know I don't have anyone working for the town. That I don't have family members working for the town. It's just me here in Franklin. So I have I think making sure we work for the people and we're transparent about it and do the best things we can do is important. And I've gotten taken action whenever I see a problem. Say, let's do something about it. Let's not just stand around and talk about it. Let's go do something about it. And I've attended finance committee meetings. I organize a community. One thing I do is I saw that people in the LGBT community didn't have anywhere to socialize. So I took over an LGBT media group, and now we have over 10,000 members. So I'm a doer. And then finally, I get results. I delivered lower fees. I delivered senior tax relief. I've proven results for the people of Franklin. I want to continue that work, and I hope I could count on your support on the council. You could visit my website at votemax.us. You could also call me at my cell, 508 4567 MAX. 508 4567 MAX, and MAX is 629 for the record. So like I said, any questions, I can make myself available. I care about this community. I care about making a difference, and that's why I'm running. So thank you.
Well, thank you for stepping up and taking the effort. And thank you, listeners, for participating. Stay tuned. We've got more of these coming. And a quick reminder for all that we do this because Franklin matters.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.